The evening sun was setting over the quiet streets of Riverside, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sergeant David Williams had just finished a long day at the Veterans Affairs Hospital, where he'd been attending meetings about his transition back to civilian life. After 3 tours overseas and countless nights sleeping in desert tents, he was finally home for good. David checked his watch as he drove down Main Street. He had exactly 45 minutes to get across town, stop at home to change into his dress uniform, and make it to City Hall. Tonight was special. The mayor was presenting him with a community service award for the youth mentorship program he'd started 6 months ago. 15 kids from rough neighborhoods were now staying in school, staying out of trouble, and actually talking about college. That meant more to him than any military medal ever could. He switched lanes carefully, his military training making him almost obsessive about following traffic rules. The light ahead turned yellow, and he slowed to a stop, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel to the rhythm of the jazz playing softly on the radio. His mom's voice echoed in his head from that morning. "Baby, I'm so proud of you. Your father would be too." His dad, also a veteran, had passed away 2 years ago. David wished he could be there tonight. In his rearview mirror, David noticed a police cruiser pulling up behind him. He didn't think much of it at first. The light turned green, and he proceeded through the intersection, maintaining the speed limit exactly. But then he saw the flashing red and blue lights. His heart sank a little, though he couldn't figure out what he'd done wrong. He put on his turn signal and pulled over into a gas station parking lot, making sure to choose a well-lit area with plenty of space. His hands went to the 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel immediately. He'd had this conversation with his younger brother 100 times. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Be respectful no matter what. It shouldn't have to be this way, but it was. The officer who stepped out of the cruiser was a stocky man with a buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses, even though the sun was nearly down. Officer Jake Sullivan had been on the force for 12 years, and everyone in the department knew his reputation. He had more complaints filed against him than any other officer, but somehow nothing ever seemed to stick. His friends on the force called him tough. The communities he patrolled had other words for him. Sullivan approached the driver's side window with his hand resting on his belt, near his weapon. David kept his hands on the wheel and waited. The officer tapped on the window with his flashlight harder than necessary. David rolled it down slowly, making sure his movements were obvious and non-threatening. "License and registration?" Sullivan barked, not even offering a greeting. "Good evening, officer," David said calmly. "Can you tell me why I was pulled over?" Sullivan's jaw tightened. He hated when people ask questions. "I'll ask the questions here. License and registration now." David took a slow breath. "Of course, sir. My license is in my wallet in my back pocket, and the registration is in my glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them slowly, okay? Just get them," Sullivan snapped, shining his flashlight directly into David's eyes. Moving deliberately, David retrieved his wallet and pulled out his license, then carefully opened the glove compartment for the registration. His invitation to tonight's ceremony was sitting right there on top, along with a photo of him in his army uniform with his unit, but Sullivan didn't seem to notice or care. Sullivan snatched the documents and examined them with his flashlight. "Stay in the vehicle," he ordered, walking back to his cruiser. David sat there, hands back on the wheel, watching in his side mirror. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The officer was just sitting in his car, and David couldn't tell what he was doing. Was he running his license? Making phone calls? Or was this just a power move making him wait and worry? Finally, Sullivan got out and approached again, this time from a different angle. David's military instincts kicked in. Something felt off about this whole situation. "Step out of the vehicle," Sullivan commanded. "Sir, can you please tell me what violation I committed?" David asked, his voice still respectful but firm. He had rights and he knew them. "Don't make me ask you twice." Out of the car now, David's mind raced. He hadn't been drinking. He wasn't speeding. His car was properly registered and insured. He'd used his turn signal. What could this possibly be about? But arguing would only make things worse. He'd seen too many videos, heard too many stories. Black man argues with cop, things escalate, someone ends up hurt or worse. "I'm complying, officer," David said clearly, wanting his words recorded if the dash cam was running. "I'm opening my door now and stepping out slowly." He pushed the door open with his left hand, keeping his right hand visible. As he stepped out of the car, he kept his hands slightly raised, palms open. He was wearing khaki pants and a button-down shirt. Nothing threatening, nothing suspicious. Just a man trying to get to an awards ceremony. "Turn around, hands on the vehicle," Sullivan ordered. "Sir, I don't understand what's happening." "What am I being detained for?" David asked, his voice steady despite the anger and confusion building inside him. "You match the description of a suspect," Sullivan said, and David could hear the hint of satisfaction in his voice, like he'd been waiting to use that line. What suspect? What description? Black male, late 20s to mid-30s, short hair, medium build. "There was a robbery this morning at a convenience store on 5th Street. David almost laughed, but caught himself. That description could fit thousands of men in this city. It was so vague it was almost meaningless, but he knew what was really happening here. He'd been driving while black in the wrong neighborhood, and this officer had decided that was reason enough. "Officer, I've been at the VA hospital all day in meetings. I have proof. I have people who can verify where I was, and I'm a sergeant in the United States Army. If you just look at my—" "I don't care if you're the president," Sullivan cut him off. "Hands on the vehicle. Now." By now, several cars had slowed down to watch what was happening. A woman in an SUV had pulled into the gas station and was recording on her phone. A couple of teenagers on bikes had stopped across the street, their eyes wide. Everyone in this neighborhood knew what it looked like when someone was being harassed by the cops. David placed his hands on his car, his mind going to a place he'd been trained to go in combat. Stay calm, assess the situation. Don't escalate. Survive. It was humiliating and enraging that he had to use his combat training just to get through a traffic stop in his own hometown. But here he was. "Sir, I'm telling you, I'm a sergeant in the Army. My military ID is in my wallet. I'm scheduled to receive an award from the mayor tonight at City Hall. Please, just look at my identification." But Sullivan wasn't listening. He was enjoying this too much. Another car pulled over, and then another. People were watching now, and David felt a small measure of relief. At least there would be witnesses. At least someone would see what was really happening here. Sullivan stepped closer, invading David's space. "You know what your problem is?" he said quietly, his breath hot on David's neck. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you. You always have some excuse, some story." David closed his eyes for just a moment, fighting back words that would only make this worse. He thought about his mom, who would be getting ready for the ceremony right now. He thought about the kids in his mentorship program who looked up to him. He thought about his late father who'd taught him to always take the high road even when it felt impossible. "I'm not resisting, officer," David said quietly. "I'm just asking you to look at the facts." Officer Sullivan pulled out his handcuffs, the metal clinking in the evening air. The sound made David's stomach drop. This was really happening. He was about to be arrested for absolutely nothing, and there was nothing he could do about it without making everything worse. "Put your hands behind your back," Sullivan ordered, his voice loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. He was performing now, David realized, putting on a show of authority. "Officer, please," David said, keeping his voice level. "I'm begging you to just check my information. Call the VA hospital. Call City Hall. I'm supposed to be at an award ceremony in 30 minutes. I haven't done anything wrong." "You're being uncooperative and suspicious," Sullivan announced loudly, clearly for the benefit of anyone recording. "That gives me probable cause," David wanted to scream. He wanted to tell this man exactly what he thought of him and his abuse of power, but he'd spent years in the military learning discipline and control. He'd faced down enemy combatants in war zones with more composure than he felt right now, but he couldn't afford to lose it. "I'm cooperating completely," David said clearly, making sure his words would be picked up by any cameras. "I've answered all your questions. I've provided my identification. I've explained where I was today. I'm not resisting in any way. Hands behind your back." Sullivan grabbed David's right arm and yanked it back roughly, twisting it at an angle that sent a sharp pain through his shoulder. David gasped but didn't pull away. Any sudden movement, any sign of resistance, and this could turn deadly. He'd seen it happen too many times to other men who looked like him. The handcuffs clicked around his right wrist, then his left. Sullivan tightened them more than necessary, the metal biting into David's skin. David had been through resistance training in the Army. He knew how handcuffs were supposed to be applied. This was excessive, meant to cause pain and assert dominance. "These are too tight," David said calmly. "You're cutting off my circulation." Sullivan ignored him and spun him around, pushing him against the car. The phone in David's pocket dug into his hip. His keys jangled as they fell to the ground. He watched them scatter across the pavement, feeling utterly helpless. A woman's voice cut through the tension. "Hey, what's going on? That man hasn't done anything." It was the lady from the SUV, still recording, her phone held high. "Ma'am, step back or you'll be arrested for interfering with police business," Sullivan shouted at her. "I'm not interfering. I'm standing on a public sidewalk documenting what I'm seeing, and what I'm seeing is wrong." More people were gathering now. An elderly man from the nearby houses had come out. 2 women who'd been walking their dogs had stopped. A teenage boy was recording on his phone too. David felt exposed and humiliated, standing there in handcuffs like a criminal. But at least there were witnesses. At least the truth was being documented. Sullivan radioed for backup using codes David recognized from his brother, who was a police officer in another city. Suspicious individual, possible robbery suspect being detained for questioning. Subject is agitated and uncooperative. "That's a lie," David said firmly. "I haven't raised my voice once." "I haven't moved aggressively. I've answered every question. Everyone here can see that." "Shut your mouth," Sullivan hissed, getting close to David's face again. David could smell coffee on his breath, see the tiny broken blood vessels in his nose, the hard set of his jaw. This was a man who enjoyed having power over others. This was a man who'd been waiting for an excuse. David turned his head away, maintaining his composure even though everything in him wanted to fight back. But he couldn't, not physically, not verbally. He could only stand there and take it, trusting that the cameras would tell the real story. Sullivan walked to David's car and started searching it, pulling everything out. The gym bag from the back seat got dumped on the ground. David's workout clothes, his running shoes, a water bottle. Then Sullivan reached the front seat and pulled out the folder that had been sitting on the passenger side. Inside that folder was everything David had been planning to bring to the ceremony. His invitation from the mayor's office printed on official letterhead. A copy of the program showing his name and photo. Letters from the parents of kids in his mentorship program, thanking him for changing their children's lives. His military commendation certificates, the ones he'd planned to show the kids at the next mentoring session to prove that hard work and dedication paid off. Sullivan barely glanced at them. He flipped through the papers like they were junk mail, clearly not reading a single word. David watched in disbelief. How could this man not see what was right in front of him? How could he not pause for even a second to consider that maybe, just maybe, he'd made a mistake? "Those papers prove everything I've been telling you," David said, his voice finally showing strain. "Please, officer, just read them. That's the mayor's letterhead. That's an official invitation. Those are military documents. I'm not who you think I am." But Sullivan was already moving to the back of the car, popping the trunk. David knew what was in there. His dress uniform, the one he'd worn when he received his medals overseas. His polished boots. More military documents. His discharge papers showing his honorable service. Physical proof of everything he'd been saying. Another police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. Officer Raymond Rodriguez stepped out. A young guy, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes and an uncertain expression. He looked at the scene, at David in handcuffs, at the crowd of people recording, and David could see him immediately sense that something was off. "What do we got, Sullivan?" Rodriguez asked, approaching cautiously. "Robbery suspect matches the description from this morning, being uncooperative and evasive." Rodriguez looked at David, really looked at him. David met his eyes, silently pleading with him to see reason, to be the voice of sanity in this insane situation. "Sir, can I see your identification?" Rodriguez asked David directly, his tone respectful. "He already has it," David said, nodding toward Sullivan. "It's in his pocket along with my registration. My name is David Williams. I'm a sergeant in the United States Army. I've been at the VA hospital all day. I'm supposed to receive an award from the mayor tonight. Everything I'm saying can be verified with one phone call." Rodriguez turned to Sullivan. "Did you run his information?" "I was about to," Sullivan said, which David knew was a lie. He'd been sitting in his cruiser for 10 minutes. He could have run the information in seconds. He just hadn't wanted to. "Let me see his license," Rodriguez said, holding out his hand. Sullivan reluctantly pulled out David's license and handed it over. Rodriguez looked at it, then looked at David again, then back at the license. David could see the wheels turning in the younger officer's mind. "This address is in Riverside Hills," Rodriguez said slowly. "That's a nice neighborhood." And David Williams? Why does that name sound familiar? It shouldn't, Sullivan said quickly. Just another— Wait, Rodriguez interrupted, pulling out his phone. David watched him type something, then saw his eyes go wide. Oh man, Sullivan, I think we have a problem. What problem? Rodriguez showed Sullivan his phone screen, but David couldn't see what was on it. Whatever it was made Sullivan's face go pale. That's not the same guy, Sullivan said, but his voice had lost its confidence. It says right here that Sergeant David Williams is receiving an award tonight. Look at the photo. It's him. Sullivan snatched the phone from Rodriguez's hand and stared at the screen. David watched the officer's face carefully, seeing the moment reality started to sink in. But instead of admitting his mistake, instead of immediately removing the handcuffs and apologizing, Sullivan did something David had seen too many times before. He doubled down. This doesn't prove anything, Sullivan said, shoving the phone back at Rodriguez. Anyone can have their name on a website. These guys are good at creating fake identities. That's probably how he was planning to get into City Hall tonight. David's mouth fell open. Was this man seriously suggesting that he'd somehow faked an entire military career and an award ceremony just to rob City Hall? The logic was so twisted, so desperate, that it would have been funny if David wasn't standing there in handcuffs. Are you serious right now? David said, his patience finally starting to crack. You think I created a fake military service record, complete with photos and medals, got the mayor's office to schedule a ceremony, all as part of some elaborate plan to commit a crime? Do you hear how insane that sounds? Watch your tone, Sullivan snapped. You're already in enough trouble. Rodriguez looked increasingly uncomfortable. He walked over to David's car where the trunk was still open and pulled out the dress uniform. The dark blue jacket was covered in ribbons and medals. Combat Infantry Badge, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal. These weren't things you could just buy at a costume shop. These represented years of service and sacrifice. Sullivan, come look at this, Rodriguez said quietly. But Sullivan was committed to his course now. He'd made the arrest or detention or whatever he was going to call it in his report. And in his mind, backing down now would mean admitting he was wrong. It would mean admitting he'd profiled someone based on nothing but the color of their skin. Men like Sullivan never admitted those things. Bag it as evidence, Sullivan ordered. Evidence of what? Rodriguez asked, his voice rising slightly. The man's a decorated veteran. Look at these medals. You don't get a Bronze Star for nothing. The crowd was getting larger and more vocal. People were shouting now, demanding that David be released. The woman with the SUV was narrating everything she was recording. This is Riverside, California, and we're watching a police officer arrest a military veteran for no reason. The officer has been shown proof of this man's identity and service, and he's refusing to release him. An older black man pushed to the front of the crowd. I know this young man. That's David Williams. He coaches basketball at the community center. He helps our kids. What are you doing to him? A younger woman joined in. He helped my brother stay out of gangs. He's a good person. Let him go. David felt tears prick at his eyes, but he blinked them back. He wouldn't give Sullivan the satisfaction of seeing him cry. But hearing these people, his neighbors, and the families he'd worked with standing up for him meant everything. They saw him. They knew him. They knew this was wrong. Sullivan's radio crackled. Unit 23. What's your status? Dispatch received multiple calls about an incident at 5th and Main. Sullivan grabbed his radio. Situation under control. Suspect in custody. I'm not a suspect, David shouted, his voice finally showing his anger and fear. I'm a United States Army sergeant who was driving to an awards ceremony. I haven't committed any crime. This is harassment, and you know it. That's it, Sullivan said, roughly grabbing David's arm. You're under arrest for resisting arrest and disturbing the peace. How can I be resisting arrest when you never told me I was under arrest until just now? And I'm disturbing the peace? I'm standing here in handcuffs. I'm not the one yelling. Rodriguez stepped between them. Sullivan, we need to call Sergeant Collins right now. We don't need to call anyone. I'm handling this. You're not handling it. You're making it worse. Rodriguez pulled out his own radio. This is Officer Rodriguez requesting Sergeant Collins to 5th and Main. We need a supervisor on scene immediately. "You just made a big mistake, rookie," Sullivan said, his voice low and threatening. David watched this exchange with a growing sense of desperation. How much worse could this get? He was already in handcuffs. He was already being falsely accused. The ceremony was starting in 15 minutes, and he was standing in a gas station parking lot being treated like a criminal. His phone started ringing in his pocket. He couldn't reach it, couldn't answer it. It was probably his mom, calling to see where he was, wondering why he wasn't home getting ready yet. What would she think if she knew what was happening? After everything he'd survived overseas, after all the times she'd worried about him in combat, he was being harassed in their own hometown. A news van pulled up and David's heart sank even further. Channel 7, the local station. A reporter jumped out with a cameraman right behind her. She looked at the scene, took in the crowd, the officers, and David in handcuffs, and her eyes lit up with the recognition that this was a story. "I'm Rebecca Chen with Channel 7 News. Can someone tell me what's happening here?" she called out. The crowd erupted, everyone talking at once, trying to explain what they'd witnessed. The reporter made her way to the front, her cameraman filming everything. She looked at David, then at his car with military uniform visible in the trunk, then back at the officers. "Officers, can you explain why this man is in handcuffs?" she asked, holding her microphone toward Sullivan. "This is an active police situation. You need to step back," Sullivan ordered. "I'm on a public sidewalk, officer. I have every right to be here. Now, are you going to answer my question or not?" Before Sullivan could respond, the elderly man from the crowd spoke up. "That's David Williams. He's a war hero. He helps our community. This officer stopped him for no reason and won't listen to anything he says." The reporter's eyes widened. "David Williams? Aren't you receiving an award from the mayor tonight?" "Yes, ma'am," David said, his voice tired. "Or I was supposed to. I don't think I'm going to make it now." Rebecca turned to her cameraman. "Are you getting this?" Then back to Sullivan. "Officer, this man is a decorated veteran scheduled to receive a community service award in less than 20 minutes. Why is he in handcuffs?" "He matches the description of a robbery suspect." "What description?" Sullivan hesitated. "Black male, late 20s to mid-30s, short hair." Rebecca's expression turned to disbelief. "That's it? That could describe thousands of men in this city. What specific evidence do you have linking him to this crime?" "I don't have to explain my police work to the media, but you do have to have probable cause for an arrest. Do you have probable cause beyond a vague physical description?" Rodriguez jumped in. "The suspect from the robbery was described as wearing a red hoodie and jeans, approximately 5'6", and weighing around 160 pounds. He gestured to David. "This man is wearing business casual clothes. He's clearly over 6 feet tall and probably weighs around 190. Sullivan's face turned red. "Whose side are you on, Rodriguez?" "The side of doing things right." Another car pulled up, unmarked, but with a light bar on top. A tall man in a sergeant's uniform got out, his expression already showing concern. This had to be Sergeant Collins, the supervisor Rodriguez had called. David felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe this nightmare was finally going to end. Collins took one look at the scene and his jaw tightened. He walked straight to David, and David saw something flicker across his face. Recognition. Sergeant Tom Collins stood there for a moment, just staring at David. His eyes moved from David's face to the uniform in the trunk of the car, to the medals and ribbons, to the papers scattered on the ground. Then his eyes came back to David's face, and suddenly they went wide with recognition. "Williams?" Collins said, his voice uncertain. "David Williams from the 142nd? David felt a wave of relief so powerful he almost stumbled. "Yes, sir." "You remember me?" "Remember you. You saved my life in Kandahar." Collins turned to Sullivan, his face darkening. "Why is this man in handcuffs?" Sullivan tried to maintain his authoritative stance. He matched the description of a robbery suspect. "I was following proper procedure." "Proper procedure?" Collins's voice rose. "This is Sergeant David Williams. He's a Bronze Star recipient. He pulled me out of a burning vehicle 7 years ago, and you have him in handcuffs in a gas station parking lot?" The crowd erupted in murmurs. Rebecca Chen's cameraman moved closer, making sure to capture every word. This was the kind of moment that made careers in journalism, and she knew it. Collins walked over to David, examining the handcuffs. "These are way too tight. Sullivan, get these off him right now." "Sir, I think we should transport him to the station and sort this out there," Sullivan protested weakly. "I said take the handcuffs off." "That's an order." Sullivan reluctantly pulled out his keys and unlocked the handcuffs. As they came off, David's hands were red with deep marks where the metal had dug into his skin. He rubbed his wrists, trying to get the circulation back, trying to process what had just happened to him. "I'm sorry," Collins said quietly to David. "This should never have happened." David just nodded, not trusting himself to speak yet. His throat was tight with emotion, anger, humiliation, relief, confusion. Everything hit him at once, and he needed a minute to sort through it all. Collins turned to Rodriguez. "Tell me exactly what happened here from the beginning." Rodriguez walked him through it step by step. The traffic stop, Sullivan's vague reasoning, David's cooperation, the search of the vehicle, the discovery of the military uniform and ceremony invitation, Sullivan's refusal to acknowledge any of it. As Rodriguez talked, Collins' expression grew darker and darker. "And the robbery suspect description?" Collins asked. 5'6", 160 pounds, red hoodie and jeans, Rodriguez said. "Nothing like Sergeant Williams here." Collins looked at Sullivan. "So you stopped a man who doesn't match the suspect description, refused to verify his identity properly, ignored clear evidence that he's a decorated veteran, and arrested him anyway." "I was being thorough," Sullivan said, but his voice had lost all its authority. He knew he was in serious trouble. "You were being thorough, or you were being biased." Collins picked up one of the papers from the ground. It was David's invitation to the ceremony. "This has the mayor's seal on it. It's dated today. It has his photo and his name. What part of being thorough involves ignoring this?" Rebecca Chen stepped forward. "Sergeant Collins, can I ask you a few questions?" Collins held up a hand. "Give me a minute." He turned back to David. "Are you okay? Do you need medical attention? Those handcuff marks look painful." "I'm fine, sir," David said, though his wrists were throbbing. "I just want to know why this happened. I did everything right. I was respectful. I cooperated. I showed him my ID. I explained where I was going. And none of it mattered." Collins didn't answer right away. He looked at Sullivan, then at David, and David could see that he understood exactly what had happened here. They both knew. Everyone in this parking lot knew. "Sullivan, give me your badge and weapon. You're on administrative leave effective immediately." "What?" "Sir, you can't." "I can and I am. This is going to be investigated thoroughly. Until that's complete, you're not on duty." Sullivan's face went from red to almost purple. "This is garbage." "I was doing my job." "Your job is to serve and protect, not to profile and harass. Badge, weapon now." Reluctantly, Sullivan unclipped his badge and handed it over, then carefully removed his service weapon and gave that to Collins, too. The crowd watching this had grown to at least 30 people, and many of them started clapping and cheering. Sullivan shot them all a look of pure hatred before storming off to his cruiser. Collins turned to David. "You're scheduled for a ceremony at City Hall, right?" "Yes, sir." "I was supposed to be there 10 minutes ago." Collins pulled out his phone. "Let me call the mayor's office. I'll explain what happened. They'll wait for you." While Collins made the call, Rebecca Chen approached David with her microphone. "Sergeant Williams, can you tell our viewers what happened here tonight?" David took a deep breath. This was going to be on the news. His mom would see it. His friends would see it. The kids in his mentorship program would see it. What would they think? What lesson would they take from this? "I was driving to an awards ceremony," David said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Officer Sullivan pulled me over. I asked why I was being stopped, but he never gave me a clear answer. I cooperated fully. I was respectful. I provided my identification. I explained where I'd been all day and where I was going. I showed him proof of who I am and what I do. But none of that mattered because of what I look like. That must have been frightening. It was humiliating," David said honestly. "I've served my country for 8 years. I've been shot at by enemies overseas. I've watched friends die protecting American freedom. And I come home to this? To being treated like a criminal in my own town for no reason other than my skin color? Yeah, it was frightening. But mostly it was disappointing," Rebecca nodded. "What do you want to happen now?" David looked at Sullivan, who was sitting in his cruiser with his head down. Part of him wanted to see the man punished. Part of him wanted justice for all the other people Sullivan had probably done this to over the years. But another part of him, the part that had learned about real leadership in the military, knew that revenge wasn't the answer. "I want change," David said. "I want training. I want accountability. I want every officer in this city to understand that you can't treat people like this. We're not profiles. We're not statistics. We're human beings who deserve dignity and respect." The crowd applauded, and David felt embarrassed. He wasn't trying to give a speech. He was just trying to process his own feelings out loud. Collins finished his phone call and walked back over. "Mayor says they'll delay the ceremony by 30 minutes. You've got time to go home, clean up, and get there. Do you need a ride?" "No, sir. My car is fine. I just need to put all my things back in it." David looked at his belongings scattered across the parking lot. His clothes, his papers, his uniform. Everything had been tossed out like garbage. Rodriguez immediately started helping gather everything. Other officers who had arrived at the scene joined in. Even some people from the crowd came forward to help. Within a few minutes, everything was back in David's car, neatly organized. Collins pulled David aside. "Listen, what happened here tonight was wrong. It was completely unacceptable. I'm going to make sure this is investigated properly. Every arrest Sullivan has made, every stop, everything is going to be reviewed." "How many others?" David asked. "How many other people has he done this to who didn't have a ceremony to get to? Who didn't have someone who recognized them? Who didn't have cameras recording?" Collins' silence was answer enough. David got into his car, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. He looked at the clock on his dashboard. If he drove straight to City Hall, he might make it just in time. David sat in his car for a moment, engine running, trying to calm his racing heart. His hands were still shaking. The marks on his wrists were starting to bruise. He could feel the adrenaline slowly draining from his body, leaving him exhausted and emotionally raw. But he couldn't fall apart, not yet. He still had to get through this ceremony, had to smile and shake hands and act like everything was normal. He pulled out of the gas station parking lot carefully, hyper-aware of every traffic law, every speed limit sign, every lane change. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was more afraid of driving now, after being stopped for doing nothing wrong, than he'd been before. That's what this kind of experience did to you. It made you doubt yourself, made you constantly second-guess, made you live in fear of the next encounter. His phone buzzed with messages. His mom had called 3 times. His brother had texted asking if he was okay. Apparently, word was already spreading. In today's world, nothing stayed secret for long. Those videos were probably already online, being shared and commented on by thousands of people. He didn't have time to go home and change into his uniform now. He'd have to go to City Hall in his regular clothes, wrinkled from being pushed against the car with bruised wrists and a tired heart. Some award ceremony this was turning out to be. Traffic was light and he made good time across town. City Hall was a beautiful old building with tall columns and wide steps leading up to the entrance. Normally, David loved coming here. It felt important, historical, like a place where real change could happen. Tonight, though, he just felt tired. He parked and sat there for another moment, gathering himself. Through the big front windows, he could see people inside milling around, waiting. His mom was probably in there, worried sick. The kids from his mentorship program were supposed to be there too, all dressed up, excited to see their coach honored. How could he walk in there and pretend everything was fine? But he'd faced harder things than this. He'd walked into enemy fire. He'd carried wounded soldiers to safety. He'd delivered bad news to families. He could walk into this building with his head held high, bruised wrists and all. As he got out of his car, he saw Rebecca Chen pulling up in the news van. She'd beaten him here. Of course she had. This was going to be a story whether he wanted it to be or not. He took a deep breath and started up the steps. The security guard at the door recognized him immediately. "Sergeant Williams, we were getting worried about you." "Everything okay?" "Long story," David said with a tired smile. "Is my mom here?" "Second floor in the main hall. Mayor's waiting for you too. He wants to talk to you before the ceremony starts." David took the stairs slowly, his legs feeling heavier with each step. When he pushed open the doors to the main hall, conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at him. His mom broke from the crowd and rushed over, her eyes scanning him like she was checking for injuries. "Baby, what happened?" Sergeant Collins called and said there was an incident. She grabbed his hands and saw the marks on his wrists. Her face went pale. "Oh my God, did someone hurt you?" "I'm okay, Mom, just a misunderstanding that got way out of hand." But she was already crying, pulling him into a hug. "Your father would be so angry. So angry, you don't deserve this. You've given everything for this country and they treat you like, Mom. Not here, please, let's just get through tonight." The mayor approached, a short man with silver hair and a concerned expression. "Sergeant Williams, I just got off the phone with the police chief. I cannot apologize enough for what happened to you tonight. It's completely unacceptable." "Thank you, sir." David didn't know what else to say. What do you say when an apology can't undo what happened? "If you need to postpone this ceremony, we understand completely. Your well-being is more important than any event." David looked around the room. There were city council members, local business owners, other veterans, and most importantly, the 15 kids from his mentorship program. They were all dressed in their best clothes, looking at him with wide eyes. They'd seen him as someone strong, someone who had it all figured out. What did they see now? "No, sir. We should do this. Those kids have been looking forward to it." The mayor nodded, respect clear in his eyes. "You're a good man, David Williams. This city is lucky to have you." The ceremony began shortly after. David stood on the stage, listening to the mayor talk about the mentorship program, about the impact he'd had on these young lives, about his military service and his dedication to the community. It all felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. When it was his turn to speak, David approached the podium and looked out at the audience. His mom was in the front row, still dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. His brother had arrived and was standing in the back, his own police uniform crisp and clean. The kids from the program were sitting together, hanging on his every word before he'd even started speaking. "Thank you, Mayor, for this honor," David began, his voice steady despite everything. "When I started the youth mentorship program 6 months ago, I did it because I remembered what it was like to be a kid in this city, trying to figure out who I was and where I fit in. I had good people in my life who showed me that I mattered, that I had potential, that I could be more than what some people expected me to be." He paused, looking down at his bruised wrists, then back up at the audience. Should he mention what happened? Should he pretend it didn't? The kids were watching him. What lesson did he want to teach them? "Tonight, on my way here, I was pulled over by police," he said, and he heard the gasps from the audience. "I was handcuffed and detained even though I hadn't done anything wrong, even though I cooperated fully, even though I provided proof of who I am and where I was going. It happened because of assumptions, because of bias, because of fear of people who look like me." The room was completely silent now. His mom had fresh tears running down her face. The kids were leaning forward in their seats. "I tell you this not to ruin this ceremony, but because I think it's important that we're honest about the world we live in. These young people here, my mentees, they're going to face challenges that some people in this room can't imagine. They're going to be judged before they open their mouths. They're going to be seen as threats before they're seen as human beings. And I want them to know that it's not right. It's not fair, and it's not their fault." One of the kids in the front row, a 14-year-old named Jerome who'd been failing school when they first met, raised his hand. "Coach D, what did you do? When they stopped you, what did you do?" David thought about his answer carefully. "I stayed calm. I was respectful. I asked questions politely. I didn't argue or fight back even though I wanted to, even though I was angry and scared, because sometimes surviving the moment is more important than being right." Another kid, a girl named Tanya, spoke up. "But that's not fair. You shouldn't have to do all that just to not get hurt." "You're right. It's not fair. But until we change the system, until we change people's hearts and minds, we have to be smart. We have to be strategic. And most importantly, we have to support each other." David looked at the mayor, then at the police chief who had arrived during his speech. Real change comes when people in power decide to listen instead of assume, when they choose to see individuals instead of stereotypes, when they hold people accountable for their actions even when those people wear a badge. The audience started applauding, slowly at first, then building to a standing ovation. David felt overwhelmed by it all. He didn't want to be a symbol or a spokesperson. He just wanted to coach basketball and help kids and live his life without fear. After the ceremony ended, David found himself surrounded by people. Everyone wanted to shake his hand, offer their support, share their own stories of unfair treatment. It was overwhelming, His mom stayed close, protective, making sure he wasn't completely mobbed. Rebecca Chen managed to get through the crowd with her cameraman. "Sergeant Williams, do you have a moment for a quick interview?" David really didn't want to do this. He wanted to go home, take a long shower, and process everything that had happened. But he also knew that staying silent wouldn't change anything. His story was already out there. He might as well tell it properly. "Sure," he said, straightening his shoulders. Rebecca's questions were direct but fair. She asked him to walk through the entire incident from the moment he was pulled over to the moment Sergeant Collins arrived. She asked how it made him feel, what he thought should happen next, what message he had for other people who might face similar situations. David answered honestly, "I was scared. I kept thinking about all the stories I've heard, all the videos I've seen. I kept wondering if I'd make it home tonight. And that's not a feeling anyone should have during a routine traffic stop. What do you want people to understand about what happened? I want people to understand that this wasn't just about me. This happens every day to people who don't have cameras recording, who don't have a ceremony to get to, who don't know a supervisor. Those people deserve justice too. They deserve to be treated with dignity." Behind Rebecca, David saw the police chief watching the interview. The man's face was grave, troubled. Good, he should be troubled. This had happened on his watch in his department. After the interview, the chief approached. "Sergeant Williams, I'm Chief Anderson. I want you to know that we're taking this extremely seriously. Officer Sullivan has been placed on administrative leave and will be conducting a full investigation." "How many complaints has he had filed against him?" David asked directly. The chief hesitated. "I can't discuss personnel matters." "So more than one?" "There have been complaints, yes. And yet he was still on the street, still stopping people, still abusing his authority." "Why?" The chief looked uncomfortable. "Our review process." "Your review process protects bad cops," David interrupted, surprised by his own boldness. "It protects people like Sullivan while they harass citizens, while they violate our rights, while they make people like me afraid to drive in our own neighborhoods." Several people nearby had stopped talking to listen. The chief was aware of the attention, and David could see him trying to figure out how to handle this conversation without making things worse for himself. "You're right," the chief finally said. "Our system has failed. It failed you tonight, and it's failed others before you. That's going to change." "I've heard that before," an older black woman spoke up from nearby. "Every time there's a big incident, every time the cameras are rolling, you people promise change. And then nothing happens. The same officers stay on the force. The same patterns continue." Others murmured in agreement. The chief looked like he wanted to disappear. "Ma'am, I understand your skepticism," he said, "but I give you my word that this time will be different." "Words are cheap," she responded. "We need action." David's brother, Kyle, who'd been standing quietly in his own police uniform, stepped forward. "Chief, if I could say something?" The chief nodded, looking relieved to have another officer in the conversation. "I'm Sergeant Kyle Williams, David's brother. I work for the county sheriff's department. And I want to say that what happened to my brother tonight made me ashamed of my profession." Kyle's voice was steady but emotional. "I became a cop because I wanted to help people, to protect my community. But when I see officers like Sullivan using their badge as a weapon, it makes me question everything." "Kyle, you don't have to," David started, but his brother held up a hand. "No, I do have to, because if good cops stay silent, nothing changes. David did everything right tonight. Everything. And it didn't matter. That should terrify every police officer in this room, because it means our training is broken, our system is broken, and our culture is broken." The chief shifted uncomfortably. "Officer Williams, I appreciate your perspective, but what? But you'd rather I stayed quiet? Supported the thin blue line even when it's being used to strangle justice?" Kyle's voice rose slightly. "My brother served his country with honor. He saved lives. He's mentored kids. He's everything a citizen should be. And tonight he was treated like a criminal. If that doesn't make you want to tear the whole system down and rebuild it better, then I don't know what will." The room erupted in applause. Kyle looked surprised by the response, but he stood his ground, his jaw set. David felt a surge of love and gratitude for his little brother. Kyle had always looked up to him, but tonight Kyle was the one showing real courage. The police chief excused himself shortly after, promising again to investigate thoroughly. David didn't have much faith in that promise, but at least the incident was being documented, recorded, shared. At least there would be pressure for accountability. As the crowd began to thin out, the kids from the mentorship program gathered around David. They looked worried, uncertain, like their hero had been revealed to be vulnerable after all. "Coach D, are you really okay?" Jerome asked quietly. "Yeah, buddy. I'm okay. Shaken up, but okay. What you said about staying calm and being smart, does that always work?" This was from a quiet kid named Chris who rarely spoke up. David crouched down so he was at eye level with them. "Honestly, no, it doesn't always work. Sometimes people do everything right and still get hurt, but it gives you the best chance. And that's all we can do sometimes is give ourselves the best chance." Tanya wiped her eyes. "I hate that this happened to you. You're the best person I know." "That's the thing about prejudice," David said softly. "It doesn't care who you are or what you've done. It just sees what it wants to see. But that's why we fight it. That's why we keep being excellent, keep being kind, keep proving those assumptions wrong." His mom joined the circle, putting her hand on his shoulder. "Your father used to say that excellence is the best revenge. He meant that when people expect you to fail, expect you to be less, the most powerful thing you can do is succeed anyway." David stood up, feeling the weight of the evening settling on his shoulders. "Listen, kids, tonight was hard. Really hard. But we're not going to let it stop us. Next week, we still have practice. We still have tutoring sessions. We still have our plans and our dreams. One bad officer doesn't get to take that away from us." "Will Officer Sullivan get in trouble?" Jerome asked. "I don't know, I hope so. But whether he does or not, we keep moving forward." The kids eventually left with their parents, and David was finally alone with his mom and brother. They walked out to the parking lot together, none of them saying much. What was there to say that hadn't already been said? "You coming home tonight?" his mom asked. "I don't like the idea of you being alone after all this." "I'm not alone, Mom. I've got Kyle." "Actually," Kyle said, "I was thinking I'd crash at your place tonight. We can order pizza, watch a game, not talk about any of this for a few hours." David smiled, grateful for the offer. "Yeah, that sounds good." As they stood there in the parking lot, David saw Sullivan's police cruiser drive by slowly on the street. The officer looked at them, his face unreadable in the darkness, then kept driving. David felt a chill run down his spine. "That guy's going to be a problem," Kyle said quietly. "He already is a problem. The question is whether anyone's going to do anything about it." That night, lying on his couch with his brother snoring softly in the recliner and a basketball game playing on mute, David couldn't sleep. His wrists still ached. His mind kept replaying the incident, thinking of all the things he could have said or done differently, even though he knew he'd handled it perfectly. The video went viral overnight. By the time David woke up the next morning, stiff and sore from sleeping on the couch, his phone was flooded with messages. Hundreds of them. News outlets requesting interviews, friends checking in, strangers offering support or in some cases making threats. Kyle was already awake, scrolling through his own phone with a grim expression. "It's everywhere." National news picked it up. Social media is going crazy. David sat up slowly, rubbing his face. "Is that good or bad?" "Both, probably. Good, because there's pressure for accountability now. Bad because you're going to lose any chance at privacy for a while." Sure enough, when David checked his phone, he saw that the video from the gas station had been viewed over 2 million times. There were dozens of news articles with headlines like, "Decorated Veteran Handcuffed," "By Police and War Hero Racially Profiled in Hometown." His face was everywhere. Some of the comments on social media were supportive. People praising his composure, demanding justice, sharing their own stories of similar experiences. But others were hateful, accusing him of playing the race card, claiming he must have done something to deserve it, suggesting the whole thing was staged. "Don't read the comments," Kyle advised. Nothing good ever comes from reading the comments. But David couldn't help it. He wanted to understand how people could watch that video and still defend what Sullivan had done. How could they see him being cooperative, see the clear evidence of who he was, and still find a way to blame him? His phone rang. It was Sergeant Collins from the police department. "Williams, how are you holding up?" "I've been better, sir. Listen, I wanted to give you an update. The investigation into Sullivan has expanded. We're reviewing every stop he's made in the past 3 years. Every arrest, every complaint. We've already found 6 other cases that look problematic." David felt sick. 6 other people who'd been treated like he was, Maybe worse, since they didn't have his resources or his platform. What happens to those people? We're reaching out to them, offering to review their cases. If any arrests were improper, we'll work to clear their records. It's not enough, I know, but it's something. And Sullivan? Collins was quiet for a moment. Between you and me? He's done. The department can't protect him anymore. Not with this much attention. The district attorney is also looking at whether criminal charges are warranted. Civil rights violations? Possibly. I can't say more than that right now, but yeah, that's the direction it's heading. After hanging up, David checked his email and found a message from the mayor's office. They wanted to know if he'd be interested in joining a new task force on police reform. Community members and officers working together to review policies and training. It would be time-consuming and probably frustrating, but it was also a chance to actually make a difference. The doorbell rang, and Kyle went to check who it was. He came back with Rebecca Chen. "I'm sorry to show up at your home," she said. "I tried calling, but I figured your phone is probably blowing up right now." "You could say that," David replied. "I wanted to let you know that our story last night got a huge response. People want to hear more from you. We're putting together a longer segment for this weekend, focusing on racial profiling and police reform. Would you be willing to participate? Maybe bring some of the kids from your mentorship program. Let them share their perspectives." David hesitated. "I don't want this to be all about me. There are thousands of people this happens to who never get their story told. Then let's tell their stories too. Use your platform to amplify their voices." It was a smart idea, and David knew it. He agreed to think about it and get back to her. Over the next few days, David's life became a whirlwind. More interview requests than he could count. The police department released a statement promising comprehensive reform. Sullivan was officially terminated, and the district attorney announced he was pursuing criminal charges. 3 city council members called for the police chief's resignation. Protests and counter-protests were being organized. The kids from the mentorship program were dealing with their own reactions to what happened. Some were angry, wanting to march and protest. Others were scared, suddenly aware of dangers they'd been too young to fully understand before. David held a special meeting with them and their parents to talk through everything. "I won't lie to you," he told the group gathered in the community center. "What happened to me was wrong, and it's going to keep happening until we change the system. But I don't want you to be so scared that you stop living your lives. I don't want you to give up on your dreams because you're afraid." "But how do we not be scared?" Jerome asked. "If it can happen to you, Coach, it can happen to any of us." "You're right. It can. That's why we have to be smart, like we talked about, but also why we have to support each other. When something happens to one of us, we all step up. We document it, we share it, we demand accountability. We don't accept it as normal." A parent raised her hand. "David, what you're doing, speaking out like this, it's brave. But aren't you worried about retaliation?" He'd be lying if he said no. Sullivan might be fired, but he had friends on the force. David had already gotten threatening messages from people who thought he was making cops look bad. His car had been keyed in the grocery store parking lot the day before. "I am worried," he admitted, "but I'm more worried about what happens if good people stay silent. My brother said something the other night that stuck with me. He said if good cops don't speak up, nothing changes. Well, the same is true for everyone. If good people don't speak up when they see injustice, nothing changes." Kyle, who'd been attending more of these sessions, nodded. "And for what it's worth, there are a lot of good cops who are disgusted by what happened. Officers who want to do better, who want to rebuild trust with communities. We're not all like Sullivan, but the system protected him for years," Chris pointed out. "Doesn't that make the whole system bad?" "It makes the system need serious reform," Kyle replied. "There's a difference. We don't need to throw everything away, but we do need to fix what's broken. Better training, real accountability, community oversight, officers who actually live in the neighborhoods they patrol and understand the people there." The conversation went on for 2 hours. By the end, David felt exhausted but also hopeful. These kids were asking the right questions, demanding real answers. They weren't going to accept the way things were just because that's how they'd always been. A week after the incident, David was invited to speak at the city council meeting. The chambers were packed with people, standing room only. News cameras lined the back wall. This was clearly going to be a contentious meeting. Several people spoke before David's turn. Some defended the police, arguing that officers have difficult jobs and need support. Others shared their own experiences of being profiled, harassed, or worse. The divide in the community was stark and painful to watch. When David finally approached the microphone, the room fell silent. He looked out at all those faces, at the council members seated at their high desk, at the police chief sitting stiffly in the front row. My name is David Williams, and I'm a sergeant in the United States Army. I've served 3 tours overseas. I've been awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. I run a youth mentorship program that works with at-risk kids in this community. And 2 weeks ago, I was handcuffed and detained by one of your police officers for no reason other than the color of my skin. He paused, letting that sink in. I'm not here to bash all police officers. My brother is a cop. Sergeant Collins, who helped resolve my situation, is someone I respect deeply. There are many good officers doing difficult work. But we have to acknowledge that there are also officers like Sullivan who use their badge as a weapon, who see certain people as threats before they see them as human beings. What happened to me got attention because I'm a veteran, because there were cameras, because I had a ceremony to get to. But I promise you this happens every single day to people who don't have those advantages, and those people deserve justice just as much as I do. David continued his speech, his voice growing stronger with each word. I'm here tonight to ask for real change, not promises, not press releases. Real, measurable change that makes our community safer for everyone. He pulled out a piece of paper with notes he'd prepared. First, mandatory bias training for all officers, conducted by community members who've experienced profiling firsthand. Not some corporate seminar, but real conversations with real people about real impacts. Several council members were taking notes. The police chief's expression was unreadable. Second, a civilian review board with actual authority to investigate complaints and recommend discipline, not an advisory board that gets ignored, but one with real power to hold officers accountable. Someone in the audience shouted their support. Others joined in with applause. Third, officers should be required to live in or near the communities they serve. You can't protect people you don't know, don't understand, and don't care about. We need officers who see us as neighbors, not as threats. Fourth, complete transparency on officer complaints and disciplinary actions. The public has a right to know if an officer has a history of problems. That information should be easily accessible, not hidden behind privacy laws that protect bad cops. David folded his paper and looked directly at the police chief. And finally, Sullivan shouldn't be the only one held accountable. Everyone who saw the complaints against him and did nothing, everyone who covered for him, everyone who let him continue harassing citizens, they're part of the problem too. The chief stood up, his face red. That's not fair. We have procedures, protocols. Your procedures protected a racist cop for years while he terrorized black and brown people in this city. David interrupted. So forgive me if I don't have much faith in your procedures. The room erupted in chaos. People shouting, arguing, some supporting David, others defending the police. The council chair had to bang the gavel repeatedly to restore order. After several more speakers and 3 hours of debate, the city council voted. They approved the creation of the Civilian Review Board with actual enforcement power. They mandated new training programs. They committed to making complaint records public. It wasn't everything David had asked for, but it was a real start. As people filed out of the chambers, many stopped to shake David's hand or thank him for speaking up. But he also heard muttered insults from others, saw the angry glares from officers who felt he'd betrayed them by going public. Sergeant Collins approached as David was leaving. That took guts, what you did in there. Just telling the truth. I know. But the truth makes people uncomfortable, especially when it forces them to look at their own failures. Collins lowered his voice. Listen, you should know that Sullivan's lawyer is claiming this is all about you trying to get a settlement from the city. He's going to try to make you look like you're just after money. David felt his stomach drop. I haven't asked for a dime. This was never about money, I know that. But that's the strategy they're going with. Just be prepared for it to get uglier before it gets better. Over the next month, it did get uglier. Sullivan's lawyer went on the offensive, trying to paint David as someone looking for attention and a payday. They dug into his past, found a fight he'd gotten into in high school, tried to make it sound like he was violent and aggressive. They claimed he'd been driving erratically before being pulled over, even though multiple witnesses and video footage proved otherwise. The local police union released a statement saying that the new oversight policies would make it impossible for officers to do their jobs. Some officers threatened to quit. There were protests both supporting and opposing the reforms. Through it all, David kept showing up. He went to every city council meeting. He participated in community forums. He worked with the new Civilian Review Board to develop fair but firm policies. And he kept running his mentorship program, kept helping kids, kept being a positive presence in his community. 3 months after the incident, Sullivan was officially charged with violating David's civil rights, filing a false report, and misconduct. The trial would take months, maybe years, but at least there would be a trial. At least he would face real consequences. But the real victory came when the Civilian Review Board started reviewing Sullivan's old cases. They found 12 incidents where people had been wrongly arrested or harassed. Charges were dropped. Records were cleared. Apologies were issued. It wasn't enough to undo the harm, but it was something. David was invited to speak at a national conference on police reform. Standing in front of hundreds of law enforcement officials, community activists, and policymakers, he told his story again. But this time, he also talked about the progress Riverside had made. Change is possible, he said. It's hard and it's messy and it makes people uncomfortable. But it's possible. Our city isn't perfect. We still have work to do. But we're having conversations we weren't having before. We're building relationships between police and communities. We're holding people accountable. After his speech, several police chiefs from other cities approached him, asking for advice on implementing similar reforms in their departments. David realized his experience, as painful as it had been, was creating ripples far beyond Riverside. 6 months after that night in the gas station parking lot, David was back at City Hall for another ceremony. This time, he was being honored along with the Civilian Review Board for their work on police reform. Sergeant Collins was there too, receiving recognition for his integrity and willingness to hold his own department accountable. Officer Rodriguez, the young cop who'd tried to intervene during David's stop, was being promoted. In his acceptance speech, he talked about how that night had changed his perspective on policing. I realized that wearing this badge comes with a responsibility to protect everyone, especially from other officers who abuse their power, Rodriguez said. Sergeant Williams showed incredible dignity under circumstances where most people would have lost their cool. He could have been angry and bitter, but instead he channeled that experience into making our city better. That's real heroism. After the ceremony, the kids from David's mentorship program gathered around him. The group had grown from 15 to 32. Other community centers were starting similar programs using David's model. Jerome, who was about to graduate high school with a scholarship to study engineering, gave David a hug. Coach, I've been meaning to tell you something. What happened to you that night, it scared me. But watching how you handled it, how you turned something terrible into something good, that taught me more than anything you ever said in a coaching session. What did it teach you? David asked. That we don't have to accept things the way they are. That one person speaking up can actually make a difference. That dignity and courage aren't about never being afraid. They're about doing the right thing even when you are afraid. David felt tears prick at his eyes. This was why he'd gone through all of it. The interviews and the meetings and the uncomfortable conversations. For these kids. For the community. For the possibility that things could be better. Sullivan was eventually found guilty on 2 of the 3 charges. He served 8 months and was barred from ever working in law enforcement again. It wasn't as much as David had hoped for, but it was more accountability than most cases like his ever saw. A year after the incident, David was promoted in his Army Reserve unit. He expanded his mentorship program to 3 more community centers. He fell in love with a teacher he met at one of the schools his kids attended. Life moved forward, but he never forgot that night and he never stopped working for change. He testified before the state legislature about police reform bills. He trained new review board members in other cities. He shared his story with anyone who would listen, always emphasizing that it wasn't really about him. It was about everyone who didn't have cameras rolling, who didn't have a ceremony to get to, who faced injustice in silence. On the anniversary of his wrongful detention, David stood in that same gas station parking lot with some of the community members who'd witnessed the incident and recorded it. They'd turned the anniversary into a community day, with food and music and voter registration tables. A year ago, I was standing here in handcuffs, scared and angry and confused, David told the crowd. Today I'm standing here as a free man in a community that refused to accept injustice. That's the power of people coming together. That's the power of demanding better. He looked around at the diverse crowd, at the mix of community members and police officers who'd shown up to show their support for reform and healing. It wasn't perfect. There were still officers who resented the changes. There were still incidents of profiling and misconduct. Change was slow and incomplete, but it was happening. Real, measurable change, and that made everything he'd been through worth it. As the sun set that evening, David got in his car to drive home. He put on his turn signal, checked his mirrors, and pulled out carefully. He still felt a spike of anxiety when he saw police cars. Probably always would. That was part of the lasting impact of trauma, but he also felt hope. Hope that the kids in his program would grow up in a slightly better world. Hope that other communities would learn from Riverside's example. Hope that one day, people who looked like him could drive home without fear.